Now, when I saw this issue of Time magazine, The Science of Staying Healthy, and the little print down there says, want to keep the doctor away? New discoveries can help prevent everything from obesity to cancer to heart disease. I'm like, wow, this is great. Now, part of me said, I know it's not new discoveries, but it's great that this is going to be getting out to the general public now. But another part of me said, you know who publishes this magazine. You know it's not going to have anything really, really good in there. For instance, there was an article in there, Rethinking Breast Cancer, New Treatments, A Guide to Saving Lives. There was nothing in this article except refinements of chemotherapy, radiation therapy, new drugs. No mention about diet. No mention about the things that can actually have a positive impact on ridding yourself of breast cancer or not getting it in the first place, even if it runs in your family. Here's in a nutshell what causes diabetes. What you're looking at is a cell. This thing over here is an insulin receptor. In each cell is something called a glucose transporter module. Glucose is sugar, okay? So when you eat a meal of something sweet that has sugar in it, what will happen? The sugar gets into the blood. The body has to get that sugar out of the blood and into the cell. The cell needs to be fed, and the blood sugar can't get too high or you'll be in trouble. So when the brain senses this sugar coming into the blood from a meal that you've just eaten and blood sugar is starting to rise, what the brain does is it signals the pancreas over there to start producing insulin. Insulin is one of the things the pancreas makes. Now that insulin, when it physically touches the insulin receptor of a cell, that glucose transporter module will merge its membrane with the membrane of the cell, poke some straws through. Now the sugar has a way of getting into the cell. That's the mechanism. That's the way it works. When the cell is sufficiently fed and no more sugar should be coming in, the straw retracts, the glucose module goes back to where it's supposed to be, and all is well. And the blood sugar level has come down accordingly. Now that's the way it works if you're eating a healthy diet. Let's say you're eating a diet that has too much fat in it. If there's too much fat in your diet, and we'll define what too much fat is later, but if there's too much fat in your diet, there's going to be too much fat in your blood. The fat here is depicted by these little yellow globules. Now, if that fat blocks the insulin receptor, it can also coat the insulin, it can coat the sugar, it can coat the whole cell. But if it just blocks the insulin receptor, that pancreas can put out all the insulin that it wants to. The glucose transporter module isn't going anywhere, and that cell's not going to get fed. Not such a big deal because a cell can skip a few meals. It's not a problem. But the big problem is, what about the sugar in the blood that's going to be building up? So the sugar in the blood starts building up. The pancreas is told by the brain to keep producing more insulin. When the pancreas starts getting tired, the brain tells the adrenal glands to make something to make the pancreas to put out even more. So now the adrenal glands are getting into the act and they're getting all worn out. But the point is, the blood sugar is still building up more and more. And this is when you get a diagnosis of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Healthier diet equals easier digestion. And easier digestion will equal more energy and less disease. How does easier digestion equal more energy and less disease? Well, digestion is a very energy-intensive process. Okay, it can take 40 to 60% of your daily energy requirements just for digestion. Of all the different hundreds and hundreds of processes your body goes through in a day, digestion, the most energy-intensive process. Okay, and here's why that range of 40 to 60%. It can take 60 or even 65% if you're eating a standard Western, a typical Western diet, an unhealthy diet. 40% if you're eating a very, very healthy diet. The healthiest diet you can possibly eat still requires 40%. That's a pretty big chunk still, right? But let's get these numbers in a better, let's put them into context. Everyone has a basal metabolism of about 30%. What basal metabolism is, if you woke up and you didn't open your eyes, you just lied there for 16 hours, didn't think, don't think about anything because that requires some energy, just lie there. Don't listen to music, and then went back to sleep. Your body still required 30% of your daily energy requirement to exist, just to live. Everybody. This doesn't include changing the flat tire. This doesn't include digestion. This doesn't include healing. This is just to exist. Okay. So let's take the 30% away from the 100 that everybody has. So everyone really has 70 for everything else. Digestion, healing, changing the tire, playing with the kids, right? Thinking. 70%. Now let's take those energy figures, those digestion figures, away from that 70%, right? So if you're eating an unhealthy diet, you can be left with 10, maybe even 5% at the end of the day. That's why people, they come home from work, they're dead tired, they fall asleep during dinner, their face goes right into the mashed potatoes, right? They don't have any energy left. They're spent by the end of the day. And if they don't have anything left, and healing requires some of what's left, and you're only left with 5%, that's got to be impacting healing negatively, right? But when you go to a healthy diet, now you're left with 30%. That's pretty good. 30%, now you're able to heal, play with the kids, not fall asleep in your mashed potatoes and things like that, okay? But when you go from 10% to 30%, what kind of an increase is that, mathematically speaking? That's a 200% increase. And that's why when people go from a very, very unhealthy diet all the way up to a very, very, very healthy diet, they all report the same thing over time. Wow, I have so much more energy now. It must be, the food. I'm eating more, there must be more energy in the food. It's not that there's more energy in the food, it's that the digestion is easier now. And it's freeing up that energy, going from 10 or 5 to 30%. Okay, so this is important to understand. And when you free this up, if there was any healing that your body was trying to do that it just couldn't do a good enough job because it just didn't have enough at the end of the day, maybe 10 or 5% left over, now it's got plenty. Now healing is going to increase. This is why diseases start to go away, and the body is then able to resolve diseases by eating healthier. All right, so carbs are the body's fuel of choice. That's what the cell actually runs on. Simple carbohydrate, glucose. That's the fuel that goes in the cell, just like the fuel that you have to put into your gas tank of your car. But your body only wants food for fuel and nutrition, and that's it. So there's a ratio you can figure of fuel to nutrients. There's a fuel to nutrient ratio in the foods we eat. Okay, that's a given. Can nature design a food that has just the right amount of fuel and just the right amount of nutrition? Well, it can't really, because your fuel and nutrition requirements don't parallel each other. They don't do this. They're doing this. So what does nature do? Nature packs so much nutrition into food that when you eat according to your caloric needs, you're going to get plenty of nutrition. That's the way it would work perfectly if you're eating uncooked food. But look what happens when you cook the food that you're eating. Look what happens to the nutrient value of the food. Now you still need to eat for this nutrient requirement, right? So what happens? You've eaten for your caloric requirement, but now your body, you're still hungry. Do you ever see people who are overweight, they get hungry? They're not hungry for fuel. They've got plenty of stored fuel in their body. This is what they're hungry for, this gap right here. So what do? They're hungry, they're going to keep eating. So they eat to hopefully get to this point, but now look what's happened. That's overeating right there. That's the cause of overeating. And I show this slide to nutritionists, people with PhDs in nutritional sciences, and they're like, wow, I was never taught this. Okay. Let's talk about pH now. Everything has a pH. Your hair, your pool water, skin, and food. And this is very important. Eating an alkaline forming diet as opposed to an acid forming diet. When you eat animal products and grain foods, they metabolize acidic. Fruits and vegetables metabolize alkaline. Now what do I mean by metabolize? If you were to take a piece of paper and you were to put it in an ashtray and light it on fire until it was all burnt up, is there anything left in the ashtray? You can take that ash and measure its pH. But when it comes to food, we're talking about the food's effect on the body from the ash that it leaves after it's been metabolized by the body. So when you're eating fruits and vegetables, obviously you're going to be eating an alkaline forming diet, which is what you want to eat. And one of the reasons why is cancer and osteoporosis thrive in an acidic environment.